Hello and welcome to Manta Ray Finance. So today we're going to be talking about rental properties, and we're going to talk about, does it make sense to purchase a rental property with the real estate market being absolutely bananas? So we're going to run through a whole entire example today, and then we're also going to just talk about simply cash flow. So if it cash flows, it's a go. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So, you could click off after that. If it cash flows, she's good to go. Enough cash flow at least. But we are going to run through the pros and cons right now of purchasing a rental property. So we're going to dive into that. If you like the content, think about subscribing if you want. And let's go ahead and dive into some pros and cons on the board here. All right, so getting a rental with pros and cons. So what are a couple of the pros of getting a rental? I didn't write a couple on there. We'll discover them as we go. So interest rates are remarkably low still, 2.5 to like 3% that you can get. So interest rates are still crazy, crazy low. Inflation's even higher than these interest rates right now. So basically your house is just going to be gaining value because inflation is higher than the rates are right now. So that kind of is a super good point in buying a home, because basically your loan's going to devalue itself because inflation's higher than loans are right now, which is actually pretty crazy when you think about it. Cash flow, if it's cash flow, it goes. So if you're making decent cash flow, and you need to keep in mind that if something were to break or if something were to go wrong with the property, or if you have vacancy, which we'll get to with the cons, you need some cash on the side as well. And that's one of the biggest things for rentals. It seems like you need just a lot of cash. So if it cash flows, it goes. $500 to $1,000 a month, I think, is a proper amount of cash flow. You can deal with issues that pop up with that cash flow, and it's a decent amount, enough to have a buffer if something were to happen. Equity. So right now, houses are exploding in value. So the equity that you can get can just keep going up and up and up and up, which would be wonderful, because then you just gain that value in that home, which is perfect. So equity keeps going up, and I don't believe we're in a crash situation like 2008 where everybody and their brother was able to get a loan. I think it's just a supply and demand issue. But then again, that's like a story for a different time. But anyway, equity, it could keep going up and up and up and up, and then you gain that value in that home right now. Like, I thought it was a bad time to buy a house 3 years ago. It turns out it was a good time to buy, because stuff just blasted the top off the last 3 years. If you were going to implement the BRRRR model, so the BRRRR model, basically you buy, you renovate, you rent, and then you refinance, and then you repeat. There's actually another 4 hours on there. And then you repeat. So that way you can just keep doing the process, and when you refinance, you yank your initial money out and you just keep going and going and going. Now these properties are all getting scooped up really, really quickly with, cash offers, generally speaking, so they're pretty hard to find, at least in my area. I don't know about yours. So that's kind of what I have for the biggest pros, in my opinion. That interest rate really being a very, very solid pro, especially if you plan on keeping the rental property, for your lifetime here. Cons. What are some cons? So you need 20% down, generally speaking, on a rental property. Unless you buy a duplex and you homestead it, then you could get a normal loan for that for 5% down. But for a rental property, generally speaking, you're going to end up needing 20% down, which is kind of nuts. Also, you're going to have 3 to 4% closing costs that you have to figure in as well. So this is just stacking up to a lot of money, especially with the amount that homes are going for at the moment. A crash or a bubble. So housing prices have just blasted the last 3 years or so, 4 years ago, or I guess since 2000, after the crash in 2010, I guess they started rebounding. And are we due for a crash? People have talked, the housing bubble's going to pop, housing market, blah, 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 blah. And, that's something to definitely think about. Now, if it crashed, I don't believe that rental values would go down. The property would go down, but I don't believe that rents would go down significantly. So that's not a huge worry if you already have the property, especially if you plan on holding it, where it's going to regain that value over time. Not a huge problem, in my opinion. Vacancy. How long are you planning on either re-renovating the place, and how long are you planning to give yourself a little buffer money-wise before you can get that person in there? So you don't want to be sitting on a house where you're paying a mortgage for your home now and you're paying the mortgage for your rental property. That's just a very, very sketchy situation. So those are the pros and those are the cons, and now we're going to just run through a real example of something that I feel like would fit decently. Okay, so on the board here, we go ahead and we have an example of a house that would cash flow, how much it would cost to get into this home, and how much you could think about taking home every single month on this rental property. This is not doing like the BRRRR model or anything. This is just buying a home. And I know this example for $200,000 might be a little bit crazy since housing prices are way higher, so you could possibly go higher, but the same principles do apply. So let's say you see this property for $200,000 and it looks just absolutely fabulous. Generally speaking, hopefully you can use the 1% rule and you can get $2,000 per month in rent on that property. Hopefully. It might be lower than that, and that's something you'd have to look in for your cash flow. If it does not cash flow, it is not a go, in my opinion. And this is all just, not a financial advisor, nothing like that. Okay, so 200K, you have to put 20% down. So that's 40 grand out the gate right there. And then you also have to think you have closing costs, other fees, stuff like that. So let's say you're going to be putting $48,000 down into this $200,000 property, which is, a buttload of money. Like, certainly it's a buttload of money. So let's say on that 160K you have left, since you put down 40 grand, now you're sitting at 3% interest on this mortgage. I just put in 3 because that's kind of the average right now. So your mortgage alone is going to be $675. You always want to take your mortgage, your taxes, and your insurance and bundle those all together so you know what you're going to be cash flowing. And now this might be quite minimal because you may have other expenses like an HOA or some other stuff. That all needs to be calculated into your monthly expenses, and then you make sure what you have coming in is more than you have going out, obviously. So your taxes, we're going to assume 1% of the property divided by like 12 months. So I calculated it out to be about $166 per month. Your insurance, $150 per month. So overall, we have $991 for this $160,000 loan that we're going to be paying every single month. So $991, we're just going to round that to $1,000 right now. You should be able, with the 1% rule, to hopefully rent this place out for $2,000. So what are you going to cash flow every single month? So you're going to cash flow $2,000 minus $1,000. So you have your rent minus your expenses, and you're cash flowing $1,000 per month, which is pretty good. So you have $1,000 per month. You're going to times that by 12 months, and now you have your yearly return of $12,000. And granted, this is like basically a perfect situation. So you use $48,000, and in your first year, you return $12,000 of that. You had a rate of return of 25%. Now, you can't tell me there's anything that has a better rate of return than that. Like, that's pretty much the most optimal rate of return that a person can have. What are the negatives that can happen? Let's say you get this loan for this home, and now the value absolutely drops through the floor. So now instead of it being $200,000 valuation, it's $150,000. So in that case, at least now you're having your taxes go down. So your taxes are going to go down equally to the value of that. So, and that's not much money, but it would be a little bit of money that you're shaving off of the expense side of things. The rent is also possibly going to go down as well. So now let's say your house is worth $150,000. You're doing the 1% rule, $1,500 a month for rent. Now you're only cash flowing $500. And if something breaks, like a water heater or anything like that, that's going to require extensive amount of money, or the roof goes bad, or something like that, something big, then you're going to be not cash flowing for a hot minute, and that's going to be a huge, huge expense. So what do we have in summary here? So in summary, I feel like if it cash flows, it's a good go, in my opinion. And you have to have enough money for expenses that are unforeseen. So you have to make sure it cash flows, and you have to include every single expense. I just did it very, very simply, where it was taxes, insurance, and your mortgage. But you have to make sure if you have an HOA, include that in there. If you're planning on including like lawn services or like internet or whatever, just definitely include that in to what your monthly expenses are going to be, and make sure you're cash flowing a decent amount if something breaks. Also, the vacancy, you have to kind of, make up for that as well. So the biggest thing is it's going to cost you, the cost of entry is just quite astronomical right now, in my opinion, because $200,000 house is not even a very expensive house for where the market is right now, and you need $48,000 to get in that place. Plus, you probably want to have at least 6 months expenses paid for just in case, stuff happens, or if you're going to be renovating or whatnot, you're going to need $50,000+ to be able to get into this place and hopefully be able to get it, going and good. If you have that money, then I think it is possibly a very, very good investment, even if things fall. So for me, it's just a question of how much do you have to put down on these properties right now? Like, properties are kind of crazy expensive, but I feel like that's kind of countered right now by the interest rate and how inflation's kind of getting out of hand as well. So for me, if it cash flows, it goes. Make sure you have the money for expenses. If you have just enough to do the down payment and closing costs and everything to get into this house, and then you have vacancy, oh no, now you got a mortgage that's not paid for like 3-4 months because you've had vacancy for a while and you didn't plan for this expense. So it's definitely something that needs a lot of planning, but I'd say even in this hot market, if you have the money, the rate of return, if you can find something that's good, is still really, really phenomenal. And that simple example, that's a rate of return of 25%. That's crazy. That's a really, really good rate of return. So if the cash flows, it goes. So that's kind of the takeaway from this one here. So if you like the content, think about subscribing, and thank you for watching.